Thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Dustin Bird, professor of philosophy and religion at the University of Olivet, also the editor-in-chief of Ekporosis Press and the founder and co-director of the Institute for Critical Social Theory. Today, we're going to be talking about the culture wars. Politics within the United States is deeply divided. Many analysts believe that outside of the Civil War, the U.S. is more divided now than ever. What fuels much of these divisions are the various culture wars, which are comprised of topics such as LGBTQ plus rights, religion in the public sphere, including public schools, the issue of abortion, what has been called critical race theory, immigration, Black Lives Matter, and the changing demographics of America. In essence, such culture wars are struggles for identity and the light culture that guides that identity. Should America be a Christian nation, reflecting the values, beliefs, ideals of the majority religious tradition, or should it maintain itself as a secular democratic republic, wherein one is free to be religious or not? Should America continue to be a majority white country and therefore limit immigration from non-white countries, or should we embrace the ideal of a multi-ethnic, multiracial, and therefore multi-confessional identity? Should we continue to embrace our Willensgemeinschaft, a willed people brought together by our political ideas, a la the US Constitution? Or should we insist on a Volksgemeinschaft, a people rooted in pre-political foundations such as shared ethnicity, shared language, shared history, shared religious traditions, etc.? Unlike the traditional right and left, which fought predominantly over a political economy, the culture wars reflect the antagonisms between those who see America's future in the cultural past and those who dream of a better American culture in the future. The English phrase culture war is borrowed from the German Kulturkampf, which was originally used to describe the struggles between the Catholic Church in Germany under Pope Pius IX and the Kingdom of Prussia under Otto von Bismarck, which lasted from 1871 to 1878. This struggle centered around the control over education and ecclesiastical appointments in the Roman Catholic Kingdom of Prussia. In our times, in Germany and in Europe as a whole, it is used to describe any kind of political and/or ideological conflict within society, especially as it relates to issues regarding cultural change. This is most poignant in Northern Europe, especially Germany, as it relates to mass immigration, the refugee crisis, and the Americanization of Europe, all what right-wing critics call Völkerchaos, or the chaos of people, and Umvolkung, or deculturation, or what in France is called le grand remplacement, or the great replacement. Indeed, backlash to the cosmopolitanization of Europe over individual national cultures, coupled with millions of new Europeans, has led once again to the rise of far-right and/or fascist parties in Germany, France, Netherlands, Italy, Poland, and of course, Orban's Hungary, with its equivalent in the United States with Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. The changing identity of the West is a source of severe Unbehagen, or uneasiness, which has led many into the fold of right-wing nativist populist leaders offering easy answers to complex questions. We have with us today Dr. Rudolph J. Siebert, Professor Emeritus of Religion and Society at Western Michigan University, where he taught for over 50 years, published over 30 books, and wrote hundreds of articles and essays. Dr. Siebert is originally from Frankfurt, Germany, where he grew up during the rise of the Third Reich. He later participated in World War II, was a POW in the US, was declared an anti-Nazi and sent back to Germany to help in its democratization. He would later return to the US with his family in the early 60s and take a position at Western Michigan University in 1965. He is a critical theorist, a theologian, a dialectical religiologist, and my mentor. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Siebert.
You're welcome.
So as I stated in my introduction, you grew up in fascist Germany, wherein the culture wars had an intense influence on the rise of the Nazis. What were the main cultural antagonisms of that time, and how did they contribute to the rise of the National Socialists?
Well, I may start out with what I experienced there personally. So I was 6 years old when Hitler came into power, and I was 17 years old when Hitler committed suicide. So 12 years I lived under this regime. And I was part of the Catholic youth movement. I was a leader in the Catholic youth movement. And there had been a concordat, a Reichskonkordat, an empire concordat between Hitler and the Vatican. And that allowed the youth movement, the Catholic youth movement. But then in the first year already of Hitler's regime, they broke the Reichskonkordat. And so the Catholic youth movement then was allowed, but at the same time was persecuted. So my leaders were beaten up. Some of them were killed. Some of them were tortured so that we could not even open up the coffin. And so that is how the Kulturkampf, the culture war, started. So Hitler had done this concordat and had gained recognition, international recognition by it. But as soon as it had fulfilled its purpose, he broke it. And so we then had to meet secretly. I took youth groups into the Taunus Mountains, and the Gestapo was after us all the time. So that was a piece of the new Kulturkampf. But of course, it started, the Kulturkampf issue started in the second German Reich. That means that which Bismarck had founded. And in 1870, the Germans won the war, the Prussians against France. France had to pay high reparations to Germany, which brought a tremendous economic upward movement in Germany. And so during this time, the Protestant chancellor, Bismarck, a very conservative man, but a very great statesman in a certain way, like Metternich, another conservative statesman, he started this culture war against the Catholic minority in the otherwise Protestant Prussia. So, and that Hitler, in a certain sense, repeated that after he had founded the Third German Reich, the Third German Empire. And we experienced it in this way.
Yeah, and so with any of the culture war issues of the Second Reich unresolved to the point where they contribute to the turmoil that went on in the Weimar Republic, or were the culture war issues within the Weimar Republic something native to that time?
Well, of course, the situation there was different. Up to Reagan, we did not really have parties which were concerned with ethical values as such. But in Germany, we had the Center Party, which was totally Catholic. So something similar did not exist really in the States. So, and this Center Party was the one which gave Hitler the emergency laws. And the emergency laws made Hitler into a dictator. And the Center Party then dissolved itself, and they did all this with consent of the Vatican. So that was then later on then in the Republic after the war. Then we did that again in Germany. There was the Christian Democratic Union, which was founded in Hessen and then all over the German Republic. So it was again a party which had a value system, which was Catholic or Protestant. As a matter of fact, I worked with Walter Dirks and Eugen Kogon, and they wanted to have a different Christian Democratic Party, one which would unite the Christians and the workers. But then Adenauer came and threw the workers out and united the Catholic and the Protestant bourgeoisie in his party. But it was a value party. It was then a Catholic Protestant type of party, which was different from the Center Party. But nevertheless, I think for us, the Kulturkampf issue, the cultural war, started really with maybe at the Reagan time, when suddenly these issues like abortion and birth control and all these issues became important for people. And they replaced somehow another concern which was there before, namely the antagonism between the classes, the class war. So in order to hide the class war, the Germans used racism. So the Jewish question came up and was overshadowing completely the class struggle, which the fascists did not resolve at all. So with us, we also we somehow were hiding the class struggle with the race issue, but then with all kinds of other ethical issues like the all these issues with LGBT and so on that moved into the political sphere. And that was rather new for us, but not really for the Europeans.
Yeah, and so issues of like abortion and whatnot might not have been all that important when you first came to the United States in the 1960s because it hadn't quite been politicized yet. So what were the major important cultural war issues that were going on in the 1960s? Because there certainly was a lot of them. I mean, that was a
Well,
very
in the 1960s, there was still very strong in the foreground the class issue. So many of the students in the student revolution were Bakuninists, anarchists, or they were Marxists, and they were concerned with with overcoming the class war by establishing a socialist or even a communistic type of a state. So the culture war issues came really up after the 60s, after the 70s, and so on, when the Soviet Union was dissolved and when the neoliberal counter-revolution was victorious. Then suddenly these culture issues came up, and I think a main function of all the culture issues was to hide the class issue. There was no talk about class anymore or the class struggle. It all became now a value struggle, a Kulturkampf.
yeah, I mean, just looking at the history of the United States, especially on the issue of abortion and how it was very much depoliticized, but intentionally made into a political issue as a way of dividing, especially working class Catholics who predominantly voted the Democratic as opposed to Republican. But when that became a wedge issue, it cut a lot of Democratic support from the Catholic community, which went to the Republican and became one issue voters. And so you see the culture wars almost as a strategy, as opposed to these are the most important things that we have to deal with in society. And you're saying, no, it would be the class antagonism, class domination, class war. But we cover it up, we camouflage it with all these other issues. But it's not to say that these other issues aren't important, correct?
Yeah, they are important, but they were not in the political sphere as such with us. But with the Europeans, it was different. So the Germans. So with us, these culture issues came just after the 60s were over, after the student revolution had been repressed. Then these culture war issues were definitely a strategy in order to hide what would be most important for us, particularly since the abyss between the ruling power elite, the capitalistic elite, and on the other side, the masses of the people, the abyss became deeper and deeper. But the deeper it became, the more it had to be hidden. And that whole culture talk daily refers to the abortion issue took its place then. And this abortion issue is very strange because Jesus never talked about abortion. Probably he would have been against it, but he talked about homosexuality, but he did not talk about abortion, in spite of the fact that this was a problem at his time, of course, as well. So the question is why then Christians concentrate almost daily, one-sidedly, on this abortion issue, not talking at the same time about the death penalty or not talking at the same time about war. There in the Palestine, we have 37,000 people killed in that war and 10,000 children. So wherever these wars are, not only embryos, but children are killed at the same time. So it was a very one-sided type of a concern, and it is repeated. It is some kind of a monomanic type of a thing to concentrate on this one issue. And it is definitely not only a question of morality, but also a question of politics. And so Trump now moves also into this anti-abortion thing in order to gain votes. And so it has become a political football.
Yeah, I remember the former priest, James Carroll, who's been laicized, but he's a author and a filmmaker and journalist. And I remember in an interview one time, he said something about the Vietnam War that was especially poignant, where he said that had the Catholic Church or had the US military been dropping contraceptives on Vietnam, they would have condemned that war. But they weren't dropping contraceptives, they were dropping napalm, and napalm was fine for a large part of the church. Is that division within the church still here today? Because obviously we know there was a good portion, especially in the 1960s and connected to Vietnam, a good portion of the Catholic Church that condemned that war. I'm thinking of the Berrigan brothers and whatnot. Is that division still within the church today?
Well, we have a deep division between a conservative Catholicism, which is carried by the Eternal Word television network mainly, but by others as well. So there is the threat of a schism. We have in that program, we have very often critique of Pope Francis, and his more open, maybe even democracy inclined Pope with the Solidarity movement, and which has democratic elements where bishops and laity are voting together and come up with very new ideas. So that is, it's astonishingly that conservative Catholicism is particularly powerful in the United States, and why in such a progressive country we have such a regressive type of Catholicism. That is an astonishing contradiction. And it is this, of course, this conservative Catholicism, which concentrates on these culture issues and particularly on the abortion daily and hourly.
Yeah, maybe it's because of that progressive side of America that there's such a strong backlash and conservative side. Like there's one dialectical side pulls this way, the other one strengthens and pulls that way. I mean, that's one possibility. Um, yeah, I seem to remember that Pope Francis has, I mean, since he was elected in 2013, he's made a lot of statements on what would be considered culture war issues that seem to have angered or at least dismayed a lot of the conservative side of the church, such as when he was asked about LGBTQ folks and their moral standing. Do they go to heaven? He said, "Who am I to judge?" Which I think, if you're on the more conservative side, people were expecting him to say, no, it's morally wrong. You know what I mean? This is a major sin. It'll send you to hell. But he didn't. He said, who am I to judge?
Yeah, and he said hell was empty. Well, that's a very optimistic view. But I think what I mean when I say democratically inclined is this inclusiveness. So I think what is the object of the attacks from the conservative side is this immense inclusiveness. He wants to include comical people, and he wants to include politicians. The first time appeared in this meeting of the seven nations, seven democratic nations, the rich nations. He gave a speech there about artificial intelligence and so on. So it is his inclusiveness and therefore his democratic tendencies which are suspicious to the conservatives. They go close to even that he may come to the borderline of heresy and so on. So some would go that far. There are even cardinals who are in opposition to this. So I think the focus point is really inclusiveness. He wants to have a truly Catholic church. That means which would be Catholic, which means universal, which would include all the people, at least be open for all the people and be in touch with all the people. And that is, of course, the council. So he does not do anything new. He just fights for what the council, the progress the council had made, and sometimes he goes a little bit further than what the council has said. And what these conservatives have done at a certain point, they opposed the council, or they reinterpret the council. They reinterpret the council in such a way as if it had brought nothing new at all. While, of course, the other side was so hopeful because the council did open up some windows to the world.
Yeah, I seem to remember that Ratzinger was very much a part of Vatican II as an advisor, the theological advisor, and that he became very much dismayed with I mean, you can't really say the consequences, but he became dismayed with certain aspects of the church and its embrace of, as we were talking about in the 1960s, in the issues of class consciousness and class war, but that somehow led him into a very conservative side of the church, where he then embraced a very conservative side of the culture wars. And it seems to me that Pope Francis today is, like you said, he's almost like an extension and embodiment of Vatican II, which is open to these issues, open to the others. Although he's not like I mean, people call him a liberal. I don't see anything very liberal about him. It's like you said, he's open, he's inviting, he's inclusive. But it seems like Francis himself has become an issue of the culture war.
Yeah, but he has become an issue because he is the incarnation of what was new in the council, and he wants to push that through. So there's the little issues like, or maybe not so little. There's the issue of the Latin Mass, and so the conservatives would like to have the Latin Mass back, or that it can be celebrated everywhere, and so on. And the Pope was very strict. He made some, maybe determined that one church maybe may celebrate the Latin Mass, but the others had to follow the council and so on. So that is where the issue, where the struggle, the culture war inside of the Catholic Church is burning, and it is a very dangerous thing. And he said, oh, the Pope, he doesn't want to have another Protestant church in Germany. So, but there are tendencies in the solidarity movement which hopefully will not bring about another schism between those who take the council seriously and want to go beyond the council, and those who think that the council brought nothing new at all.
Yeah, and in today's age too, especially, it seems like the culture wars are driven much by social media. In social media, how it's being driven on social media is also reflected in mainstream media, especially on things like Fox News, or you mentioned EWTN. How do these type of outlets fuel the flames of the culture wars?
Well, I think that both of these stations, Fox News and the Eternal Word, which are very closely connected, even Arroyo, Raymond Arroyo is employed by both of them, the same man that in Nazi Germany that never went so far, that the same man is in both stations and plays an important role in both of them. So it is, of course, what they say all the time is that all our misery comes from Marxism. And always Marx comes up again, and Marx is everywhere. And Biden is a socialist, or Biden is a communist. And so fascist movements, of course, rescue operations for capitalism. And that is why Trump is paid so much by the billionaire class now, and has this tremendous treasure there which he can use for his legal fees and also for his advertisement, for his running for office again. So the ruling class likes Trump, of course, and will support him. And because fascist movements or authoritarian movements would like to stay with the capitalistic system. And therefore, the whole war issue, too, Roosevelt had the New Deal and tried to overcome the disaster of the Great Depression. And but it didn't really work. What worked was the war. And so they gained this great insight that war is the most powerful anti-depression measure one can possibly have. And so we had about 25 wars since 1945. It keeps the factories going, the uniforms and the rockets and the tanks and all that is very expensive stuff. And so one has to keep that going. And of course, the workers take part in it too, because they have jobs. And so part of the workers then have jobs and the others are fighting or let other people fight, which is even better. So that is something which has come through and is not discussed very much, why we are involved in one war after the other. And when one is closed in Afghanistan, another one opens up in the Ukraine, or another one opens up in the Middle East and so on. So there's no end to it. There's no end to those wars. And one important function of these wars is that it keeps us, of course, controls the depressive tendencies. Then, of course, when you don't have a depression, you have an inflation. So then you have to settle with the inflation, but the inflation is more bearable than a depression is. And so the war has become very important. And if we try for our Center for Peace Research, it's very hard for us to find a businessman with a conscience who would say, yes, we should explore the causes of war and remove them and so on, because war is such a tremendously profitable affair for almost everybody. We are not innocent. We pay taxes and we are part of the whole system. So that is the present situation.
Yeah, and war, when we're intimately involved in it, it seems like it's one of those few things, or maybe like a national crisis like 9/11, but war obviously happens more often than a terrorist attack. It seems like one of those things that where we can temporarily set aside the culture wars because we reunite on this issue. So when we have that outside, that external target of our internal negativity, we can focus all of our attention there. But as soon as that is gone and we're not intimately involved in a war, like the war in Iraq, for instance, then we turn on ourselves and the culture wars get heated up. And this is a whole Hegelian idea, right? That you need war is not, he says, not entirely evil because it unites people and reminds them why the state's important and things like that. As soon as that external threat goes away, the threat of within the body politic in and of itself becomes more acute.
Yeah. Well, Hegel even thought it would keep civil society healthy to have a war here and there. So, but on the opposite, he thought at his time, by 1830, that the European nations should not have any wars anymore because it was too late, that Europe was on the way to retirement and that one should not have, there was no need for new wars and so on. So, yes, but even the war, which people thought that it would unite civil society, the two wars which are going on now in the Middle East and in the Ukraine do not really unite people. As a matter of fact, they are split about both of them. So some of them want to send more money to the Ukraine and others don't want to send any money to the Ukraine. And some of them protest on the side of Hamas and the other protest on the side of Israel. So not even the wars, you may say in Hegelian terms that the wars are not big enough in order to reunite us all. So, and hopefully it will not get bigger. We must find other ways to come together with each other.
Yeah, those two wars are where the American state's involved, intimately involved in both of them, but the American people aren't seemingly involved in them. We're not sending soldiers over and participating in combat. And there was no threat to us directly with
Yeah.
either of them. So yeah, they're not as intimate as they would need to be in order to be some kind of force of unification. You had
Also,
mentioned.
also the two parties, since the Republicans may be inclined more in one way and the Democrats in another way. So the whole political system is involved.
Yeah, very much the culture wars are driving that. Russia, for instance, I just wrote a paper on this. Russia projects to the world that it is or Putin specifically, that it is the champion of traditionalism, of traditional ways of being, of the traditional family and traditional Christianity, and the West, Europe, and especially the United States is the attack on the tradition, the attack on the family, that the uh, wokeism, and he even talks about wokeism, just like our Republicans talk about wokeism, that it wants to, destroy the family and destroy society and completely secularize it, take out religion. And you have a lot of conservatives who hear that same type of rhetoric. They like that type of rhetoric. They heard it out of Donald Trump the same, because I mean, Donald Trump it's a strategy for him. He doesn't care about the traditional family one bit, but nevertheless, they heard it from Trump. And so even outside countries are playing a part or force in our culture wars. So oftentimes with the protests, the anti-Biden protests, anti-Black Lives Matter protests, you'll hear people say better to be Russian than to be a Democrat or something like this, right? Or better to be with Putin than to be with Biden. Putin is the champion of Christianity and Biden is the Antichrist. I mean, it's all these very strange things, but it comes up on and over again. In Trump, I think in his election in 2016, and even maybe less so now because he's more focused on personal grievance. But in the 2016 election, he used a lot of these culture war issues as a means of peeling off disaffected Democrats to his side of his side. And so, I mean, he pulled people from both the Democrats and the Republicans. And a lot of it was through these culture war issues.
Yeah. I mean, the sad story is, of course, if these values are really meant, if really people know what these values really are, if they are really concerned with what the fathers of the constitutions emphasized, that a democracy can function only with virtuous people. That means people who are prudent, who are just, who are chaste, who are brave, or who are faithful and hopeful and loving. Um, and then the fathers of the Constitution knew, of course, that there are no virtuous people. So the question was, where do they come from? And it was the family and was the church which was supposed to educate them. And so the problem is now Trump, of course, is not a real virtuous person at all, and he has many vices. And the Christian nationalists, they say, well, sometimes God works through evil people, and there's many examples in the Hebrew Bible, and so this therefore they are following him in spite of the fact that he is not a virtuous person and make our situation only worse.
Yeah, I remember things like the flag at football games with Colin Kaepernick. And Colin was taking a knee as he was advised to do by a former U.S. Special Forces soldier. And instead of sitting down during the national anthem, this other guy, this other former military man who played in the NFL, advised him to take a knee because that's what military does when something is wrong. You're honoring something, but you're also sending a signal something's wrong in case someone was injured, someone was killed in combat, whatever it is. But somehow taking a knee to say something's wrong in American society, that so many young Black men are being murdered by the police, or being killed by the police, or being treated at minimum unjustly by the police, that somehow became a culture war issue of, we own the flag is ours. You, the other people, in this case, a Black athlete, are disrespecting our flag by taking a knee during the national anthem, instead of seeing it how Kaepernick saw it, which was, no, I'm pointing out that American citizens are being treated unjustly and being killed. And Trump took that, brought it right into the culture wars, and basically, in many ways, racialized it. And it was, these Black athletes and their supporters are disrespecting your flag. And of course, your meant white America, right? Your flag. And it was a strategy, and it worked.
Yes.
I mean, you get things like that. And then on top of the economic issues that that Trump brought up, which in many cases, the reason why a lot of liberals moved to his side is because he did talk about the carnage, I mean, in his inauguration address, the carnage of the working class, right? That we have the Rust Belt because all these factories are gone. They went to China. And he offered them an alternative of, I, as the strong man, if you elect me, will bring them back. I mean, that was music to the ears of these disaffected people, that he could do that he would bring them back their jobs, which meant bring them back their dignity, right? Bring them back their sense of responsibility, especially for men, that they could take care of their families and things like that. Now, of course, it was complete and utter nonsense. But when you do that whole grievance, it works.
We have a similar situation like we had in Germany then. So the workers think that right-wing people are really revolutionaries, and they like this revolutionary talk. But in reality, they are counter-revolutionaries. That means they do not want to have a post-capitalistic society or something new, but they want to preserve that what is. So that misunderstanding that Trump may be a revolutionary person, I am the voice of the voiceless and all this, but in reality, he's not a revolutionary, but he's a counter-revolutionary type of a guy who, with many others, fights against the left with its Marxist ideas or whatever. So, or even Bernie Sanders, just like we have it in Northern Europe, the type of social democratic type of movements, people who do not remove the billionaire class, but are taxing them and use the tax money then in order to support the working class issues like free schools or free healthcare or whatever we have in Norway or Denmark and Sweden and Germany and so on. So that misunderstanding there, that right-wingers or authoritarian guys are revolutionaries, and instead of seeing that they are really counter-revolutionary, and we are in a neoliberal counter-revolutionary situation. The then inner revolution was dismantled, so the counter-revolution was victorious, and we are still in that time span where this victory continues. It will not be forever, but it is the present.
Yeah, and Trump's functionalization of religion was extremely appalling. It's this restoration politics that, as you talked about, with, God can use evil people for good things, like Cyrus, despite the fact that Cyrus really wasn't an evil person.
Mm-hmm.
But this idea that somehow the left and their secular politics and their LGBTQ politics and in their transgenderism and their transhumanism and all these things they want to get rid of, their postmodernism, that's destroying America. And I'm going to stop that and restore Christianity in America. Christianity and Christians, you know, it always, as Trump would say, getting it from right-wing Christians, that they're the victims in America, that they're under attack. And he's going to stop that, and he's going to restore them. And we're going to put prayer back in the White House and all this stuff. I mean, for him, he couldn't care less about that. I mean, these people are a joke for him. But he used it. And he used the culture wars as a means to get into power in 2016. And it worked well. The question then becomes, will it work again in 2024? What do you think?
Well, it will depend on the American people if it will work or not. And there is a good chance that it will work again. The functionalization of religion and ethical values is, of course, a thing of long standing, and one has to be careful. One cannot simply say it will always be functionalized. One have to see, you know, if Trump is a Presbyterian, to what extent is he really Presbyterian, or Putin is an Orthodox? How much is he really? Is it, by the way, can we always say it is always an abuse of religion, or what if some of those people are really religious? It could be the case. All human beings are religious in a certain way. So if one enters that struggle, one has to be careful if some party or some leader or whatever, if they mean it or if they don't mean it. And by their works, you will easily see it if it is meant well or not.
Yeah, just recently, Louisiana, I think it was the Supreme Court of Louisiana, said it was perfectly legal for public schools to put the Ten Commandments in the schools because it's a tradition to do that. You know, and that's driven by conservative Christians. And, you know, as a dialectician, the first thing I think of is, yeah, put the Ten Commandments in the schools, and then live by those Ten Commandments, at least the moral ones. The first few are theological, but maybe the moral ones. And what would happen to society if society, including conservatives, lived by those Ten Commandments? Your capitalism is gone with all the stealing. It's gone, right? You know,
Right.
with the lying, what would happen to politics if they actually lived by thou shalt not lie or thou shalt not covet? I mean, the Ten Commandments would be a real revolution in society, but it wouldn't be one that the conservatives would like.
Right. So, I mean, there is always this triangle there. At first, it's stealing. And when one cannot really steal, then it's killing. And then it's the lying over the stealing and the killing, that there is no stealing and killing and so on. That is, this horrible negative trinity is always played out again. So, yes, of course. And if you sum them up, the Ten Commandments, that would be the golden rule. And the golden rule, almost all religions have it, and even in secular form, it appears. So nobody can really say that something strange is imposed on people. They all have it already. So it's not a real imposition. So there are other states which want to do that as well. So, but it violates, in a certain sense, the separation of church and state. And there we have the split again. People who follow the Constitution, and that means the bourgeois Enlightenment, really, and others who want to stay with this traditional values. So whatever step we make, it always splits us again.
Yeah, that the idea that has been articulated quite often lately, that the separation of church and state is not really a thing in the Constitution, is quite laughable, considering the very First Amendment to the Constitution, that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It's right here in the First Amendment. Yet, that's part of the question is, okay, fine, the state doesn't get involved in imposing religion on people, but what conservatives are now saying on conservative side of the culture wars is that, so the state doesn't do that to the churches, but the churches should be able to impose their beliefs on the state through their elected representatives and whatnot. And that is obviously going behind the bourgeois revolution, because democratic will formation is done in secular language or secular terms in secular constitutional states. And to somehow introduce that the Bible says, or the Quran says, or the Bhagavad Gita says, and therefore that ought to be the rule or the law of the land, would certainly be going well behind the bourgeois revolution, of which our Constitution comes out of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, speaking about this secularization, the West, in terms of the civilization of the West, of which the United States obviously is a part, it continues on what Habermas calls the Sonderweg, or the deviant path regarding secularization, that it continues its secularizing path, although he says we're in a post-secular state, which basically means there's a change of consciousness. We no longer understand or believe or think that religion is going to disappear ultimately, as we thought in traditional secularization theory, but therefore religion will continue to have a place, but it is not the dominant place within Western society. What do you think, in terms of the culture wars and religion, what do you think the ultimate fate of religion and religious communities will be within the West?
Well, so we have a certain shift from these class issues, class antagonism, to the antagonism between the religious and the secular, which means really between the religious and the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment, already the bourgeois Enlightenment, but then also the Marxist and the Freudian Enlightenment, are indeed a very serious attack on religion. And people who are afraid that religion would suffer more even than it has already, they see something there. So one should not underestimate the power of the Enlightenment. It is true that it was only in Europe, but then it spread to America. But in the meantime, it has spread around the whole globe. But it is also true that where it has not spread, let's say in Africa and so on, that is where today the priests are coming from, or from India. We have Indian and priests because we have not our own priests any longer. So it means no priests come from the enlightened territories, but they all come from the not yet enlightened territories. And that shows us that these conservative people are right, that the Enlightenment is more powerful than one may think it is. And it works in people and it has its effects. And it is, of course, not always understood rightly. So the Enlightenment may enter the dialectics of Enlightenment. Enlightenment may contradict itself and so on. And we see some of these effects around us. Some things are really wild. So, but I think one should not underestimate the power of the Enlightenment, and it poses danger for all world religions as soon as this type of thinking, that means the whole issue of autonomy, the autonomy of the human conscience, which of course Thomas Aquinas would say that on Judgment Day, we will not be judged according to the teaching of the church, but according to our conscience. There you have an enlightenment, even in the high Middle Ages, this bourgeois enlightenment stuff already started, and it will not end. It will not simply stop or so. So we have to be prepared for this. And the question is what solution? And one solution is what the critical theory and the Frankfurt School recommended, and that is a translation of religious values into the Enlightenment, as it has happened, of course. So the labor unions, they changed the brotherly love or the love of the neighbor into solidarity. So, and they already, the bourgeois Enlightenment, the issue of democracy. Democracy includes equality, it includes freedom, it includes brotherhood and sisterhood. These are all values which were religious ones and have already been translated by the bourgeois revolution, more so even by the Marxist revolution. and which simply broadened the issue. That means that when Hegel says everybody has a right to property, his socialist students said, okay, we have to see that everybody has the right of property, really, that also those who produce the property, namely the workers, must also have the right of property and so on. And so that we have to have shared property. And so there is the Enlightenment has already continually translated religious value. It has rejected the reactionary elements in the religions, their cooperation with slavery and feudalism and capitalism, but has at the same time also rescued some of their values. Like, for instance, our idea of the always more perfect union is definitely rooted in Christianity. And also the equality issue, when Paul sends the slave back, what says to the slaveholder, he's your brother now, that undermines the whole slave system of the Roman Empire and is more effective than Spartacus, so who was crucified with 10,000 other slaves on the Via Appia Antiqua. So your question and our question is who will win? And I think religion will survive, but it will not survive in the form in which it is now. So we have this Eucharistic Congress going on in Indianapolis, where believers marches, thousands of them, through the streets with the monstrance and the bread in the monstrance, and in order to prove what? What they really prove is that thousands of people believe this, but it does not prove that the belief is true. There is a difference between those two, and it is, when one traces it back, it started around 1,000 or so, when the first time Christians began to doubt if Christ was really present in the bread and the wine. And then the Corpus Christi celebration came up, and these processions with the monstrance, as we have it now in Indianapolis. And but it proved at that time that they are believers, but not that their belief is true. And that is again the case today. So how effective will it be for all the nuns who have no religion whatsoever and are growing in numbers? So I'm quite sure that the religions in the form in which they exist now cannot survive. But I think that the best of them could survive by being translated into the Enlightenment movements. And Habermas's point is that this has to be that way. That means without transcendence, the human mind would degenerate. The human mind needs transcendence, needs the totally other, in order not to disintegrate. So that he wrote this wonderful 2-volume work about the philosophy of religion, and he did not become a believer, Habermas, and so also Adorno, his teacher, was not a believer. So they say non credo, I don't believe, but they are open. Adorno and Habermas wait for a better revelation, for a revelation with less contradictions. So there are certain requirements they have about religion, and the religious confusion, of course, is disturbing. And when Jesus says, be united, because otherwise the truth will suffer, well, we have all been divided and the truth has suffered. And this has to be overcome, of course, if religion should survive. It may die because of the Enlightenment attacks, but also more so because of its internal contradictions, which it cannot handle. So Putin is Orthodox. The Orthodox and the Romans were one. up to the year 1000 and so on. And then they got in trouble over the icons. And they have not been able for 1,000 years to come together. And how then can they, when they could not come together themselves, can they now make peace in the Ukraine, or can make peace in central in the in the Middle East? And so so the churches have to reflect on themselves and their own history and their own misery, and to what extent they have really followed Mohammed, or have really followed Jesus, or have really followed Buddha, and so on, or to what extent they are guilty of their own demise because of this unfaithfulness. And that comes to its extreme in these political struggles where religion is used, and you never know if they mean it or not.
Yeah, that the evangelicals in America tied themselves so tightly to Donald Trump, who for millions of other Americans represents brutality. I mean, think of the brutal system of separating children from their parents, the undocumented who are trying to get into the country. If they get caught, they separate their children. I mean, it just, that is as brutal as it comes. As a father of five, I can't imagine that. You know, or the racism, or the prejudice, you know, the Muslim ban, or the attack on minority voices, you know. And so when they tied their religious beliefs so closely to a guy who, I mean, embodies all the seven deadly sins basically on every day, you know, for a lot of non-religious people who would be open to discussing with them things like compassion and hope and charity and all these good things that come out of religion, it becomes tribal. No, you're religious. This is, you represent backwardness, brutality, hatred, and we are over here with our secular worldviews, which is compassionate and merciful and things like that, despite the fact that they both have them within them, but they won't talk to each other.
Right. But if you take just one story, the story of the Good Samaritan, there's a fellow, written, and he finds that Jewish guy who has been beaten up on the street between Jericho and Jerusalem. And he is another race, he is another culture, but he breaks, this Good Samaritan, he breaks through all these walls of race and whatever and religion, and helps him and puts him on his horse or on donkey or whatever, and takes him to the next inn and pays for him and so on. He's a wonderful symbol. So you could say that is Christianity. But what the exclusive authoritarians do is exactly the opposite. And that may be in the name of Jesus. And that is, of course, horrifying.
Right. And that seems to be what, at least from what I can see, Pope Francis is trying to break through.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that about wraps it up for our time. Dr. Siebert, it's been a wonderful discourse on the culture wars, and there's a lot more stuff we could talk about, but we'll save that for maybe our next session.
So let's end with the Good Samaritan.
End with the Good Samaritan. That's a good place to end.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.